All right, welcome back. So we are making great progress. We've got read done. We haven't done create or update or delete, but we've got read done, and that's a big one. So next, let's go ahead and add new movie quotes. So create from our static page. The HTML, there's kind of some information in it in here. Oh, it looks like this one's missing the data dismiss modal on the add quote. Don't worry, we did it right. If you didn't do that step before, you could fix it now, but my guess is that you've already got it done. And what we're going to start doing is we're going to start implementing that new modal. So there's a snippet of code right here, so I'll just go ahead and grab it on my clipboard. No reason not to. And what we're going to do is this is enabling another button. So I'm actually going to kind of merge it in with the other code. So I've kind of had everything kind of nice and clean down here on its own, but now I'm just going to kind of start merging it in. So there's this enable buttons thing, and so there's a bunch of buttons in here. So there's an add movie quote. That's the one that's like up at the top. I'm going to go ahead and stick it. I'm going to stick it right below it, just because it'll have some related code, and it'll be handy to have the two be close together. So what this does is this listens for the insert quote button, and that was the ID that we had put on the modals. So it used to be a submit button, but now it's called an insert quote button. And what that's going to do is that's going to pull the value from the quote and the movie inputs, and it's just going to print them to the screen. So that'll be a good start. Let's just kind of make sure that that's working. So I'm going to have to open up my inspector so that I get some console log messages here. I think I'll show them up on the side. And so it says check for more quotes. So that part was working. I'm going to go ahead and say add quote, and I'm going to say my quote and my movie. My screen is so narrow here, I got kind of like a mobile looking version. That's fine. And I click on add quote. You can see that it dismissed the modal because I remembered to put on that data attribute in the HTML. And it says to do, create a movie quotes for my quote for my movie. Totally just worked. Didn't do anything other than print a console log, but totally just worked. There's still quite a bit of other things we should do. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of cleanup and think about like when this movie quote like modal shows up, it should have cleared these, right? So like it should have cleared my quote and my movie. So let's fix that, and we'll also like make sure that the title's right and this button is right and things like that. So let's go in and let's see, hey, why did those things not happen? So we had this function, add movie quotes, and it obviously got called. But the things that it ran in here were for the old form, right? They're still mostly right, but there's some little problems. The modal title is still fine. We didn't mess with any of those. This guy, yeah, we messed with him. So it says type equals submit. So his like selector wasn't working, right? So his CSS selector. Turns out we've got the selector that he should have used right there. So all this does is this makes sure that that button says add quote. That's not really important until we get edit quotes. It's like if somebody clicks edit and then change their mind, they want to do an add. We want to make sure that that button says the right thing. The next things are all kind of wrong. This one is for that hidden entity key field. If you remember, we deleted that, right? So we're just going to delete the JavaScript too because it doesn't even exist. Here's an input for the name quote and an input for the name movie. Those both went away as well. So we still want the concept that this is doing, but we don't want that selector. The correct selector, though, is actually right here, which is nice. And so whenever somebody hits add quote, you just want to clear out those two inputs. So now that should clear out those two inputs. So that was a minor fix, but now, so if you refresh the page again, so now if you hit add and you type hello, and then you hit add again, it'll actually be blank. So you're responsible for a lot more with jQuery, or sorry, with Ajax, because like the page never just reloads. You're responsible for like doing all the things. No big deal. All right, so those were just kind of some little cleanups. They were fun, they were easy. What we really want to do though is we'd like to actually send this to the back end, right? Like that's the whole point. So let's go ahead and copy from the slides some code here to kind of get us started. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and copy this code. This code, if you look at it, this is actually from MovieQuote's quiz. So this is wrong code. But we're just trying to build on what you know. And what we did last time, I'm still kind of fighting my 2-space, 4-space thing. What we did last time is we made this data to send. It had a quote, a movie, and a JSON API field. This API JSON is no longer necessary. What it did, just kind of as a reminder, in MovieQuote's quiz, we use the same handler for the forms or the JSON version. That's not the case here, right? So like endpoints is totally separate. It's not the same handler, so we don't need any kind of little hacks like that. Other things we did is that went to the insert quote path. That is not the path that we want to go to now. What we want to go to now is rh.mq, and I think we called it MQ API. And so that should be, oops, it's down here. But yeah, it's right there on the screen, MQ API, great. And then we have to add on to that the name that we used. And so you can go look at your code again. But if you go over to your API, you can see that the name we used was insert. I probably could have guessed that. But I'm going to go to my MovieQuotes API /insert. And I'm going to give him data to send, which is great. He's going to give me back a JSON object, and I'm going to console log him. So this is going to actually do stuff. It's going to send a message to the back end. It's going to print something to the console logs. The only thing it won't do is it won't actually display anything new on the page yet. But that's actually fine. We'll watch that happen. So this is like my first quote from the endpoints web client. And then I will not get original. I'll just say like my movie or something. So whenever I click on add quote, it will actually send something to the back end. I must have made a mistake. It says internal server error. So I typoed something, I'm sure. And so what did it say? It said no JSON object could be decoded. So that's because I didn't quite finish. So data to send is an object, a JavaScript object. What jQuery does under the hood, this is where you have to understand what things are doing under the hood, is it takes your JSON object and it decides how do you probably want it encoded. What it does is it does form encoding, which is not what we want. And so what you can do, it's kind of neat. You just say json.stringify of your data to send. Now what that does is that actually makes a string. And what jQuery does is jQuery is kind of smart. It'll look at that string and say, hey, that sure looks like a JSON object. I bet he wants a JSON object. And so it'll actually send up a JSON object instead as the post body. Hopefully that was the only bug I had. So if I go ahead and hit refresh on this guy and I try it again, perhaps I'll type a little bit less. What the heck, I did a little bit. So my first endpoints quote, actually it's not quite true. It's my first endpoints quote from the web client. My movie. Let's work this time. Cool. So we got back a JSON reply. We got back an entity key, so it must have worked. We've got an entity key right here. It says my quote, it says my movie. It all worked. The only thing that didn't work is it didn't so much show up on the page. Hit refresh. If I hit refresh, I can see that it's actually there. Cool. So it worked. It just didn't display because like the only thing that would make it display is to actually pull it from the back end. Instead, what we're going to do is whenever we add it, we're just going to kind of like manually add that one to the top of the list. And there's actually some code in here that we're going to borrow. So we've modified that code to do those things. The code we're going to borrow, it's going to be easiest if we do a refactor first. So before, when we print it out, we'll just do this refactor together real quick. Before, whenever we wanted to add quotes, we had a whole bunch of them, right? So we kind of like added all these quotes. It turns out that these lines right here, these could probably be refactored into a helper method. So let's just go ahead and make a helper method. I'm going to call my helper method rh.mq new movie quote row. So it's actually going to like make a new movie quote row from, we'll just call it quote to add. So we'll use the same variable name. So it's going to just make that row for us and then return it, which will be kind of handy. Cool. So now we've kind of refactored it. Now we need to actually use it up here as well. Because if we didn't use it up there, it'd be kind of silly because then we'd really just be copying and pasting it, right? So we'll say quote to add. Make sure you get the singular quote there. And so that's going to give you essentially what is a table row. In this case, we're going to append that table row onto the table body. But what we're going to do up here, so I'm going to copy that onto my clipboard, find where I was at before, which is the hardest part. What we're going to do right here is we're going to actually append it somewhere different. And what we're going to do is we're going to append it to the first thing in the table. It turns out that this hidden template is kind of always the first thing in the table, so we're actually going to append it right after that. So we're just, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could do things, but we're just going to keep it simple, right? So we're just going to say, hey, quote, insert after, and then you can just say who you're going to insert it after the movie quote template. And the nice thing is you'll know if it works or not right away. Cool. So now it should still do the logs it did before. You know what? I'm going to kill the logs because we don't need the logs if it works. So now what should happen is I shouldn't have to do a reload to get it. It should actually just show up. So I'm going to say my first quote that just shows up without a page reload. And when I hit add quote, it should show up right on there. And I made another error. So this one says quote to add not defined on line 54. I always say that I should make more mistakes in these videos just because it's a good learning experience, because when you actually code, this is how you do things. So quote to add is no longer the right thing. The right thing to say here is just data, right? Because the thing that came back was just data. It turns out that data is actually a movie quote. We just call it data there. So let's go ahead and try it again. So it says my first quote that just shows up. I'm going to do another quote. My first quote that just shows up without a page refresh. And then I'm going to add the word works in the hopes that it will work. So I'm going to add it. And sure enough, it says works right there on the page. And you'll also notice that there's no messages in the console log, which is a good thing. Great. So we just implemented Create. Create is an important one to get done, right? And it's really not that different. The only real difference is that when you click on add, if you watch up here, it doesn't do a full page reload. It just shows up on the page. This page is so lightweight that you probably would never notice the difference. But it's pretty easy to imagine when pages get pretty big. They have a lot of images on them and stuff. Admittedly, the images would cache, but it gets pretty big. And this doesn't do a full page reload. And that's really one of the big values of Ajax. The other is, of course, the loading of more quotes in a asynchronous way, right? All right, so that's all we got for Create. Come back next time, and we'll work on Update, and we'll work on Delete. See you then. Bye.